Hey everyone, Connor here, and welcome back to another episode of Living Large Camping. Last week, we spent rebuilding the floor, insulating it, and just making it able to fit in the back of the Ram 1500. And this week, we are going to reseal the roof, replace the vent fan with a Maxxair fan, and we're gonna go ahead and replace the handle latch on the back door just because we don't have a key for it, and just a little extra step of security there. So we're gonna go ahead and start lowering this camper, and we'll get to it. The main project for this week's video is going to be replacing this RV vent with a Maxxair fan. Thankfully, the four-wheel campers do come pre-wired, and I'll show you that once I get this pulled off, but that is gonna be the majority of this video. And while we're at it, the roof of this thing is pretty gross, so we're just gonna go ahead and reseal the whole thing and try to get it a nice white coat. But before we can start working on removing the existing vent on the camper, we're gonna go ahead and lower it all the way down almost to the floor. That way it's more manageable, we can reach across it, and then whenever it's time to go ahead and reseal the roof, we can go ahead and do that. So we're gonna do that now, and hopefully it goes smooth. First things first, when removing this vent cover is we need to go around and remove all the screws that have mounted it to the top of the camper. So we're gonna go ahead and heat up the putty around it, scrape it off, and then unscrew it. It's gonna take a minute or two to do this, so I'm gonna go ahead and undo all of the screws on the top side, and then we'll go in the camper and remove the screws from underneath it. Now we have to take off the inside cover, and then we can see how it comes apart. As you can see here, this did come pre-wired for a vent fan, so that's gonna help us a lot in the long run. So now we're gonna take that torch and a knife and try to melt and cut the seal of this vent off so we can pull it out. Now we're gonna take a hammer and try to pry this thing up a little bit. Already got a little gap here, so just gonna take the hammer in and work it around and slowly pick up on it. And I'm using these small boards just to displace the pressure so I don't put a big dent in the roof while I'm doing this. Quick update, so there are bolts in this part of the vent, but this is where the cover came, and I can't get to the bolts, so I'm having to use this cutoff to try and saw them through, that way we can get this thing off. A mess, but finally got it off, so now I'm gonna go ahead and clean this up a little bit, and then we'll look at the new. Now I'm coming in here with the razor blade and trying to cut all of this old butyl tape off. Here's the fan we went with. It's the Maxxair Max fan. It's just got the manual opening roof, and it's a 4-speed fan that only exhausts out of the camper. All right, here's the fan. Get power on off, and then open, close, and fan speeds 1 through 4. Now that we know the fan fits, I'm gonna take it out. I'm gonna sand around the vent opening, and then we're probably gonna plug the fan in, make sure it works before we get it all sealed down. And then I'll read through the manual, make sure we're doing this right, and go from there. Now we've got the fan just sitting in here so we can test it to make sure it works before we get it all mounted. We have the pre-wired wires from 4-Wheel Camper Factory, and we have the wires from the fan. So we're gonna connect together, turn the power on, and see what happens. Here's a look at it going. So that's speed 1, 2. And 4. Pretty good looking suction with fan on the 4th speed. Just a quick look at the wattage usage from the fan. And it's on speed 1 right now. Speed 2, 2 or 3 watts. Speed 3, about 11 watts. And speed 4, about 24, 25. Hopefully we only need 1 trip to Home Depot today, but I know we're gonna have to get some lap sealant to cover all the screw holes in the top of the fan. I'm gonna look at the Flex Seal because I think we're gonna use that to reseal the whole roof. And then just a couple smaller things, but like I said, I think we can get it all in 1 trip, and that would be nice. So they didn't have the lap sealant that we need at Home Depot, so I know we're not going to be able to get the fan 100% installed today, but they had everything else that we need, so we can get it about 95% and then just put the sealant and caulk the bead around whenever that comes in on Wednesday. So we're going to go ahead and get the roof cleaned up, get the fan measured and the install vent cut, and then yeah, let's see how that goes. First thing we have to do is go ahead and trace where this vent is gonna sit, and then make sure that all of the area underneath the vent is clean and ready so that the butyl tape can bond tight with the plastic. So now we can work on getting this area cleaned up here and ready for the tape. All right, so to do this, we're gonna take mineral spirits and a rag and just try to get everywhere that's gonna sit underneath this vent. Now that the area is clean, it's time to start applying the butyl tape to the outside of the Maxxair Fan. So we're gonna go ahead and get working on that. Now we're gonna do the same thing around the top of the fan. All right, so we have that all taped along the bottom side. Now it's time to set it in and we'll get it all squared up. Now it's time to drill through the vent and into the frame and get this installed. The Maxxair fan is all mounted, so now we need to go around and scrape off the extra butyl tape that has squeezed out whenever it got screwed on. So the mounting of the fan is done. I've done everything I can do up top until the lap sealant comes in, which will be in a couple days. So we're just gonna leave this here and then we're gonna go underneath and get it wired up and get the trim plate mounted. Now that we have the fan Now that we have the fan mounted, it is time to get it wired up. So black positive to yellow positive in the camper and white negative to black negative in the camper. So let's figure out how much we need. We'll tie it off in there and yeah. Fan's all wired up. Like I said, black positive to yellow positive in the camper and white negative to black negative in the camper. There we go. So now we'll go ahead and hide these wires and then we'll get the trim plate mounted. So here's the old trim plate. I guess I could use this one technically, but it's like a gross yellow, just faded. And here's the new white one. So we're just gonna cut it to the same depth and get it installed. We're gonna cut this thing to 1 3/4 of an inch all the way around and then get it sawed off. Here's a look at get the trim plate in here, and now we can go ahead and get it mounted to the camper. And here we go. Everything is mounted and done. Fan works and it's wired into the camper, and it has a manual open and close. One thing we can work on while we wait for the lap sealant to come in on Wednesday is getting this top cleaned up. There's a lot of dirt and just age that's set on here over the years. It did spend a while of its life outside, so we're gonna take some mineral spirits and a rag and try to get some of this stuff cleaned up. We may have to do that one more time before we go ahead and put the full sealant on the roof, but for now we're going to go ahead and take painter's tape and run it all the way along the seam of the roof panel. Now the roof is clean and the tape is all the way around the top, so we're going to let this sit for a while, and then when it gets closer to installing the flex seal on the panel, we'll probably go ahead and clean it off one more time. After a little bit of time scrubbing with some mineral spirits, we can see this seam right here is much cleaner. It took a while, but I think it's really gonna help whenever we go to reseal the roof, because we'll bring the flex seal all the way down to this seam right here. Little mid-project beer. All right, so the Dicor lap sealant came in, and now we're gonna use it and cover all the screw holes and then run a thick bead all the way around the vent fan. Since I've got a little extra, I'm just going over here and putting a little bit on each of the screw holes on top, holding the roof down. Here's the finished product. With the one can, I was able to get 2 thick beads around the whole side of the vent, a nice drop on each of the screw holes, and then I went ahead and was able to fill each hole that was on top of the camper. We are going to go ahead and seal the whole entire roof, but I figured since I had a little bit extra, this wouldn't hurt. We've let the lap sealant dry overnight and kind of cure to the roof. It's still a little tacky at the touch, but I think it's going to be okay because we're just going to paint around it with the flex seal. But to start, we're going to go ahead and do the seal all the way around the top and see how it goes from there. We're going to start brushing it on the seam that runs across the top of the roof, and let's see how that kind of turns out. And that is working pretty well, so we're going to go ahead and do that all the way around the camper, and then we'll start rolling it on top. Look at the flex seal around the seam of the top, and now we're going to go ahead and roll it on the whole top here. We're going to start up front and roll it out. So we got the whole thing coated, and we're gonna give it a couple hours to dry and then come back and see if there's any spots we need to patch up. In the meantime, I'm gonna go ahead and pull the painter's tape off, just because since it is a rubber paint, I don't really want it to stick together and peel with it. If you are thinking about using something similar to Flex Seal on your camper roof, I would recommend going ahead and pulling the tape off like I did before the paint dries, just because I could tell it was getting a little rubbery, and once the paint dries on the tape, I think it may be kind of difficult to pull it off and get that nice seam in here. So I would recommend that, and yeah, we'll see how the rest of this turns out in a couple hours. Well, that's gonna do it for this week's video. We went ahead and sealed the roof with Flex Seal. We installed the Maxxair Fan, and we replaced the lock on the back of the door. So hope everybody has a great weekend. Subscribe if you're new here, and we'll see you next time.